Have you ever felt like the world took your dreams, crushed them into a ball, and slam dunked them straight into the abyss? Nicole has. She was selling her drawings to save her mother, hoping for kindness. But instead, she got ridicule, indifference, and something far worse. And then, out of nowhere, a man appeared. Someone with the power to change everything with a single stroke of a pen. But even he couldn't predict what would happen next. Nicole Williams had always known that life wasn't fair, but at 16, she was starting to realize that it wasn't just unfair, it was downright ruthless. She had spent most of her childhood sketching in the corners of whatever space she could claim as her own. Her notebooks were filled with drawings, portraits so detailed they could stare back at you, cartoonish characters with wild expressions, cityscapes that captured every brick and shadow. It was the one thing she was good at, the one thing that felt like it belonged to her. But talent didn't put food on the table, it didn't keep the lights on, and it sure as hell didn't pay hospital bills. 6 months ago, the fall. It had started with small things. Nicole's mother, Sarah, worked long shifts at a diner, one of those places that reeked of burnt coffee and broken dreams. The customers were the kind that treated waitresses like background noise, the kind that left pocket change as tips and thought they were doing a favor. Their apartment wasn't much better. A crumbling 2-room rental where cockroaches had squatters' rights, the heating barely worked, and hot water was a privilege, not a guarantee. But they had survived. They always found a way, until Sarah got sick. At first, it was just a sore back, the kind of ache that comes from years of standing on your feet for too long. Then, it got worse. The pain crept up her spine, turning simple movements into unbearable agony. By the time she finally went to the doctor, it was already too late for easy solutions. A tumor in her spine. The words hit like a sledgehammer, the kind of diagnosis that didn't just hurt. It rearranged your entire life in an instant. The hospital bill, $92,000. Nicole remembered sitting in that stiff plastic chair, staring at the numbers like they weren't real. 92 grand. They barely had enough for groceries most weeks, and now they were expected to pull 6 figures out of nowhere. Sarah just sat there, silent. No tears, no protests, just a quiet acceptance, as if she had already decided there was no way out. But Nicole refused to accept it. If the world wasn't going to help them, she'd find a way to help herself. The street hustle. Nicole had no trust fund, no rich relatives, no hidden stash of money under the mattress. So, she did the only thing she could think of. She took her drawings to the street. Every day after school, she set up on the sidewalk in downtown Atlanta, right in front of a Starbucks, where foot traffic was constant. She spread her sketches on the pavement, careful to make them look as eye-catching as possible. Some were quick sketches, others detailed portraits. Next to her, written in thick black marker on a scrap of cardboard, was her sign. Selling drawings to save my mom. Anything helps. And then she waited. Some people stopped. A mom with her toddler bought a cartoon sketch for $5. A teenager tossed her a crumpled dollar bill and mumbled something about how her art was cool. A businessman, too preoccupied with his phone, flung some loose change at her like she was a wishing fountain and kept walking. But most people just walked past. Some looked. Their eyes flickered to the sign, then quickly away, like acknowledging her would be some kind of moral burden. Others openly stared, their faces twisting with sympathy before they kept going. And then there were the ones who looked annoyed, like she was ruining their perfectly polished city experience by sitting there with her sketchbooks and her desperation. One woman in heels stepped around her like she was a stain on the sidewalk. Nicole had learned not to expect much, but she wasn't prepared for what happened next. The suit and the smirk. It was late afternoon when he stopped. A man in his mid-40s, wearing a sharp gray suit and a watch that probably cost more than their entire apartment. He stood in front of her, studying the sketches with an unreadable expression. Nicole waited. Maybe he'd buy something. Maybe he'd just walk away like the rest of them. But instead, he let out a quiet laugh and shook his head. This is ridiculous. Nicole frowned. What? He gestured at her sign. You really think selling these little doodles is going to cover a hospital bill? That's not how the world works, kid. Her stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. At least I'm trying. The man smirked. Trying? That's cute. But let me tell you something. People don't care about your problems. Life isn't a fairy tale. It doesn't work like that. And just like that, he turned and walked away. Nicole sat there, gripping her pencil so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to yell after him, tell him he was wrong, that people did care, that if you fought hard enough, you could make a difference. But deep down, she wasn't sure if she believed that anymore. She didn't cry. She couldn't afford to, because crying didn't pay medical bills. That night, everything got worse. The sun had long since dipped below the skyline when Nicole finally packed up her things. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, her stomach hollow from skipping lunch, but she told herself tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow, maybe someone with actual money would stop. Maybe she'd sell enough to make a dent in that impossible number. She slung her backpack over her shoulder and started walking home. The streets were busy, buzzing with life. Cars honking, laughter spilling out of bars, the occasional wail of a siren in the distance. She kept her head down, moving quickly, trying to ignore the ache in her legs. Her apartment was 12 blocks away. Normally, she stuck to the main roads, but tonight, she decided to take a shortcut. Bad idea, very bad idea. She was halfway through the alley when she heard it, footsteps behind her, slow, heavy. Too close. A chill crawled down her spine. She picked up her pace. So did they. Her pulse hammered. And then, a hand grabbed her arm. Midnight swallowed the city whole, the streets bathed in the dull glow of flickering neon signs and headlights that sped by like ghosts. The air smelled of rain, gasoline, and the faint, lingering scent of fast food grease from the nearby diners. Nicole moved quickly, her breath visible in the cold night air. She clutched her backpack strapped tight, fingers stiff from the chill. The weight of the day hung over her shoulders like an anchor, pressing her down, suffocating her. She had spent hours sitting on that sidewalk, watching people glance at her drawings, some stopping, some pretending not to see her at all. The little money she had made barely covered the cost of a meal, let alone something that could help her mother. And then there was him, the man in the suit. His voice still rang in her head like a cruel joke on repeat. Nobody cares about your problems. She exhaled sharply, trying to shake off the anger burning in her chest. Her apartment was still a long walk away. Normally, she stuck to the main roads, lit, crowded, safe, but her feet ached, and her patience had run dry. So, she made a decision. She cut through the alley, wrong turn. The second she stepped into the narrow alleyway, she felt it. The shift, the hum of the city faded, swallowed by shadows that stretched across the cracked pavement. The buildings on either side loomed tall, blocking out most of the light. It smelled like damp cardboard, rotting food, and something else. Something metallic, like rust. Nicole quickened her pace. Halfway through, she heard it. Footsteps, slow, measured. Too close. Her muscles tensed. The air grew thick, pressing against her chest. She swallowed hard and glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Just the alley stretching behind her, empty except for overflowing dumpsters and a flickering streetlight at the far end. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag, her pulse quickening. She wasn't alone. She walked faster. The footsteps matched her pace. Her breath hitched. She didn't think. She ran, the grip of fear. She barely made it 5 steps before a hand shot out of the darkness and clamped around her neck. A choked gasp escaped her lips, but before she could scream, another hand slammed over her mouth. A deep, rasping voice slithered into her ear. "Where are you running off to, sweetheart?" A cold, sharp object pressed against her ribs. A blade, her lungs locked up. "Wallet, now!" Her mind went blank. The alley spun around her. The shadows seemed to stretch and close in, suffocating, crushing. She couldn't breathe. The grip tightened. But deep inside her, something snapped. Not like this. Not after everything she had fought through. Not after sitting on freezing sidewalks, begging for enough money to keep her mother alive. She curled her fingers into a fist, shifted her weight. And then, with every ounce of strength she had, She drove her elbow straight into his stomach. A sharp, guttural sound tore from his throat. The grip loosened. Nicole twisted away, gasping, stumbling forward. A fist yanked her back by her hair. Pain exploded through her scalp as she crashed against him. Her vision blurred. She kicked, clawed, thrashed. The man snarled, regaining his grip, and then a sharp, sickening crack split the air. The hold on her hair vanished. She stumbled forward, wheezing, her knees nearly giving out beneath her. She turned. And that's when she saw him, the shadow in the dark. A man stood over her attacker, tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadows of his long black coat. In his hand, he held something metallic, a collapsible baton still extended. Nicole's breath came in short, ragged gasps. The man tapped the baton against his palm, staring down at the figure on the ground like he was deciding whether to hit him again. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. "You okay?" Nicole swallowed hard, still trembling, her throat burning from the grip that had nearly crushed it. She forced a nod. The man retracted the baton with a flick of his wrist and slipped it into his coat. "Who are you?" she rasped. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Just a passerby." And then he was gone. 1 second, he was there. The next, he had melted into the shadows, disappearing into the night like he had never been there at all. Nicole stood frozen, the world spinning around her. The attacker lay sprawled on the ground, motionless. She took a shaky step backward, then another, before finally turning and running, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own breath. She had survived. But something about that man, about the way he had moved, the way he had spoken. Something told her this wasn't over. Morning in Atlanta had a rhythm of its own. The city was awake, alive, relentless. A constant flow of people moving, cars honking, voices merging into an urban symphony of urgency. Nicole sat on the same freezing sidewalk where she had spent countless days before, her sketchbooks laid out in front of her. Her hands still trembled from the night before. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the memories crashed down on her like waves, pulling her back into that alley, back into the grip of fear, the footsteps behind her, the iron grip on her throat, the blade pressing against her ribs. And then him, the man in the black coat, the way he had stepped out of nowhere, the effortless, almost casual way he had taken down her attacker like it was routine. Then he was gone, like a ghost. Nicole had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that any of it had actually happened. But none of that mattered right now, because her reality hadn't changed. Her mother was still sick, the hospital bills still existed, and the world wasn't going to stop just because she was scared. So here she was, sitting cross-legged on the pavement because she had no other choice. She adjusted the cardboard sign she had written in thick black marker, "Selling drawings to save my mom. Anything helps." Then she picked up her pencil and tried to lose herself in the lines, the strokes, the movement. Art had always been her escape, and today she needed it more than ever. A shift in the air. At first, she didn't notice it, the change, the shift in the atmosphere around her. But then the whispers. They started softly, blending into the usual city noise, just another layer in the chaotic urban hum. Then they grew. Nicole glanced up, frowning slightly. People were stopping, not just a few, a lot. Some stood frozen mid-step, others hurriedly pulled out their phones, cameras flashing, capturing something. A woman clutched her friend's arm, her mouth slightly open. A group of teenagers whispered furiously, eyes wide. Nicole followed their gaze. And then she stopped breathing. Standing right in front of her, looking down at her artwork, was Denzel Washington, the moment that changed everything. Her brain completely short-circuited. There was no way this was happening. Dark coat, black sunglasses, that unmistakable presence. Nicole's heart was slamming against her ribs. She blinked once, twice. Maybe exhaustion had finally broken her. Maybe she had reached the point where her mind was just making things up. But no, this was real. Denzel Washington was actually here, right in front of her, and the entire street knew it. Pedestrians had completely stopped moving. A man in a business suit stood frozen, mid-phone call, his mouth slightly open. A barista from Starbucks pressed herself against the glass window, eyes wide as she whispered something to her coworker. But Denzel, unbothered, completely calm, like stopping in front of a teenage street artist selling drawings, was something he did every day. Nicole's lungs forgot how to function. Then, in one smooth motion, he lowered his sunglasses just enough to meet her eyes. "These yours?" he asked, nodding toward her sketches. Nicole's brain completely disconnected from reality. She tried to answer, failed, swallowed, tried again. "Yeah." Denzel's gaze flickered back to her artwork, and he didn't just glance at them. He really looked. His eyes moved slowly over each sketch, taking in every detail, the shading, the precision, the emotion woven into each line, like he was seeing something others had missed, like he understood. Nicole's breath felt shallow. The entire city seemed to be holding its breath. Then finally, he nodded. "Good work." Her heart stopped. A small, stunned sound escaped the crowd, someone whispering, "No way." And then it happened. Denzel reached into his coat and pulled out a checkbook. Nicole froze. The street gasped. A woman actually covered her mouth with both hands. A man nearby muttered, "Are you serious?" Nicole couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Denzel flipped open the checkbook, pulled out a pen, and started writing. Her heart pounded so loudly she swore he could hear it. She watched wide-eyed as his hand moved effortlessly across the page. Ink flowed. A number appeared. Her fingers curled into her palms, her breath stuck in her throat. Denzel ripped the check from the book, held it out. Nicole didn't move. She just stared at it. It took her a full 3 seconds to even lift her hand. Her fingers shook violently as she reached out and took the slip of paper. She looked down, and the world tilted. $92,000. Nicole's vision blurred, her lungs locked up. She could barely process the number in front of her. The exact amount, the hospital bill, her mother's surgery, her future, right here in her hands. She looked up at him, her entire body trembling. "But why?" she whispered, barely able to get the word out. Denzel slid his sunglasses back into place, and then, with the smallest, knowing smile, he said, "Because sometimes people need to help each other." Then, just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving Nicole sitting there, surrounded by stunned strangers, check in hand, staring at a future she had never thought possible. What would you do in his place? Would you walk past, donate, or maybe take it even further? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever faced a situation like this? Let's talk about it, because kindness deserves to be heard. This story was created to shine a light on real struggles and show that even one good action can change a life. Support the message by liking, sharing, and spreading awareness. Because sometimes the world needs a reminder that there's still good in it. Your voice matters.